Well, welcome. Today we're going to talk about an area that can affect all of us, and we hope never affects any of us. But the person at the heart of the COVID effort here in Milford and all infectious diseases, somebody who takes care of our family, somebody who really watches out for what's best for us. Why don't we start with an introduction?
Yes, hi, I'm Michael Newstein. I've been at Milford Regional now for a little over 20 years as an infectious disease physician.
You know, it's amazing because normally if you were at a medical center for 20 years, they'd consider you an absolute veteran old-timer. And in Milford, 20 years seems to be a norm.
Well, a lot of my colleagues are there that I started. Some of them who were there before me are still here. Yeah, it's a great hospital. There's a lot of loyalty. And I think we have the best of both worlds. We have dedicated physicians who've been there for 20 years and bright young physicians who keep us on our toes coming through too.
Well, one of the things that was obvious when we did the expansion was how deep the support is. If you ever told me you were going to raise $25 million out of a working class town of 30,000, I don't know that I would have bought on to that, but yet we did.
Yeah.
You know, how has the expansion affected the infectious disease effort in Milford?
Well, it's the one thing that's affected us over the last several years is the expansion, the building of the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute across the street, which is, attracted patients from all over New England, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Western Mass, New Hampshire even. And a lot of these patients are dealing with serious cancer and chemotherapy and other therapies that alter their immune system. So, one of the occasional outcomes is they come down with infections. So that's one thing that's kept our hospital, busy to some extent.
But now what can you do? I mean, if I've got to take chemotherapy, I have to take chemo. What can you do to keep the infection rate down?
Yeah. Well, our oncologists are great and they follow guidelines that have been established. Sometimes you give antibiotics to prevent infections, or you just are very vigilant. Even one low-grade fever, which, and someone who doesn't have cancer or chemotherapy, we would shrug off. We say, call your doctor right away, come to the ER right away. Yeah.
Well, now, when we look at what's keeping you busy, COVID seems to be the magic word.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was an unprecedented thing, hopefully a once-in-a-lifetime thing that hit us, 2.5 years ago. And, it was almost like being at war, those first few months. Our hospital was overrun. Our hospital with COVID patients, very busy. Our hospital struggled with, like other hospitals, getting the necessary equipment and medications. We all put in crazy hours, but we got through it pretty well for a independent hospital. Not in an urban area.
But now, is it calming down? It seems that way.
It's calmed down a tremendous amount, and there are not too many patients in the hospital with COVID. Well, some of them are, but we say a lot of them come into the hospital with other issues, and we say, oh, by the way, you have COVID, because a lot of people in the community have COVID. So we say they're coming in the hospital with COVID, not necessarily because of COVID. But there are some occasional patients, maybe one or two at any given time, who are here because they're sick with COVID. That's as compared to the beginning of the epidemic where, a third to almost a half of our patients in the hospital were there because of COVID.
Now, the question always comes up, to vax or not to vax?
Well, it's not a question, really. The vaccine for COVID prevents people from, reduces tremendously the risk of people dying from COVID. It's a fact that if you're vaccinated for COVID, you have at least a 20-fold less chance of dying from COVID than if you're not vaccinated. And you also have a much more likely not to be hospitalized if you get COVID. So, that part is just cold hard facts. Yeah.
But now when you talk about a vaccine, political science majors and sociology majors who don't understand the science of vaccines, I've heard the questions, well, you're putting part of the virus into me?
Mm-hmm. Well, to some extent early on in the epidemic, I understand why people had some pause, because this was a different type of vaccine than the previous ones we used. It was something called a messenger RNA or mRNA vaccine, where they're putting in, part of the virus's genetic material in an altered way into your cells. It wasn't getting into your DNA, but it was expressing the protein in a very efficient way. And it did a great job, particularly early on with the epidemic, of preventing, it still does a great job of preventing people ending up in the hospital. And, early on it had more of an effect of preventing preventing infection, which are two different things. Vaccines, the most important thing for a vaccine is to prevent people from getting ill or seriously ill. And the COVID vaccines still do that. The newer variants of COVID are hard to prevent from infecting people, but the vaccines can make it so if you are infected, you won't get sick, or as nearly as sick as you would be if you weren't vaccinated.
How does a vaccine work in layman's terms?
Well, it gives you immunity to the infection without getting the infection. So, we know people who get COVID, and you can get COVID more than once, and I've known people who've gotten it twice, three times actually. We know that when you get an infection with COVID, if you get another infection, you're less likely to get sick, but you still can get infected. The vaccines are kind of similar now, we're realizing, but it's sort of that protection without getting sick. So instead of getting an infection, which can make you pretty sick, to juice up your immune system, you're just getting part of the viral genetic material that will juice up your immune system.
But now, when I get inoculated,
Mm-hmm.
my antibody titer goes up, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think of IgMs first, the shock troops.
Mm-hmm.
Then long-term, I build up my IgGs.
Yeah.
If I'm not in contact with the virus or that part of the virus, does the body keep kind of like a recipe book to say next time that comes in, I
Yeah.
can make IgGs to attack it?
Absolutely. And, immunology is complicated. So the antibody response is one part of it. And what you say is basically true. If you're vaccinated or if you're previously infected, the antibody levels could begin to fall at some point. But you have these cells, which are called memory T cells, that remember that virus. So when they sense it, they could, get your body to make antibodies or make cells that will kill viral will kill the cells that have the virus. Let's put it that way.
So the body keeps this memory.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, in comes the foreign particle.
Yeah.
And if there's cells that are infected, I have a response to kill those cells so they can't replicate.
Yeah.
But I also have a response to build up my antibodies to fend it off.
Exactly.
And how long does that last?
Well, here's where it gets a little complicated. The antibodies, particularly the IgA antibodies, if you want to get specific, the ones that are in your secretions, that in your nose that prevent you, or in your respiratory tract that prevent you from getting sick, those probably only stick around for a few months after infection or vaccination. So, with these new variants anyway. So your protection from being infected only lasts for a few months. But the antibodies in your bloodstream, the IgG that you were talking about, those will last longer, but still it's a matter of several months. They'll eventually diminish, but what prevents you from getting sick enough to be in the hospital are those memory cells, which can spring to life. It will take a few days for them to kick in. But what we know with COVID is, you don't get really sick until, a week or so of illness. So it's time enough to help you.
So like people like me who I've had COVID.
Mm-hmm.
I got a call from my daughter after Christmas. We were together all of Christmas, and she said she had COVID. So I went and took my little test.
Mm-hmm.
I'm feeling nothing. And it comes up and says you're COVID positive.
Mm-hmm.
So like a good doobie, I stay home for the days. But if I hadn't taken that test, I would have never known I had COVID.
Yep.
How come?
Well, with you, who knows? Everybody's body's different, but one likely thing is that, those antibodies that were in your nose and in your airways, those probably, you didn't have the antibodies to knock out that virus. And that could be because they went down, or because, whatever virus was around, Omicron or Delta, might have been a bit different than what you were vaccinated against. So it didn't prevent infection, but if the infection's just on your airways, it will give you, a runny nose and a cough, or maybe not much of anything like you had, but it won't give you the flu-like symptoms, which are, those shaking chills. Those are the things that happen when it gets deeper into your body.
Now, I got the initial shot
Yep.
at Milford Regional.
Mm-hmm.
And then the first booster came. And I said, okay, let me go get that. And then I think it was a year later, I was told I should get a second booster.
Mm-hmm.
What is the booster doing?
Yeah. Well, what we know that, during the, real emergency of the beginning of the epidemic, it was unprecedented to get an effective vaccine within a matter of several months, which we did. But we wanted to get it into as many people as quickly as possible. So they gave you one shot, came back a month later, they gave you another shot. And, a lot of vaccines require multiple doses, most of them, in fact. So those two shots were just sort of like an emergency thing to boost to get your immune system up a bit. But what we know is that first quote-unquote booster probably wasn't really a booster. It's like most vaccines, you have to give a shot, you wait a few months and you give a second shot. So people call it a booster, but it was really completing
It was the
series.
second part of the original.
Yeah. The third part, which was really the second part.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. So then, we know people who've gotten those vaccines, have pretty good protection from severe illness, we think. We know, in fact, but, how long that lasts, we're not sure. It probably lasts, many months to a year or two. But, periodically you'll need to be boosted. And now we have this new booster that has, they call it the bivalent booster. It has a virus that's similar to what's going around now, which is called BA.5. So this may be a little more effective at preventing people from getting sick with this virus, maybe to some extent for some period of getting infected with this virus. So, it's a good idea to get this new booster, particularly if you hadn't gotten the other vaccines in the last 3 months or so. If you haven't gotten if any of the COVID vaccines for 3 months or so, it's a good idea to get boosted because we know this virus is around. It's very infectious. As cold weather comes and we're inside more and clustered, and the air is drier, and our defenses are lower, it's good to have a boost.
Now, flu virus comes in the cold weather.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any real truth to that, or is it just like the cold weather kind of directs our activities indoors closer together?
Well, that's something that people have talked about for a long time. Why are colds called colds? Because it's cold weather, right? It's not like a cold is going to give you a cold. It's a virus. But likewise, the flu tends to be worse in the winter. And there are theories for that. Some of it is what we know. People are inside, they're not outside, so they're clustered together. Some people think vitamin D might have some role in that. So if you're in the sun, maybe you have more immunity. But probably one of the most important things is, and it gets a little complicated, is the air is drier. The air is drier in the winter, and what that allows to happen is when I talk, or particularly when I cough, and if I have a viral infection or any infection in my respiratory tract, what gets out into the air are these little particles, and when it's dry out, those particles float in the air and they dry out and they just sit in the air and float around, and then if you breathe in, it goes deep into your lungs and it infects you more readily.
Now, does the dry air reduce, like, the mucous membrane? You mentioned the IgAs are there,
Yeah.
ready to fight off anything coming in the nose. Well, if it's dried,
Yeah.
there's fewer of them, right?
It could be, and it could be that your what they call mucosal immunity, the immunity in your nose and your other areas like your airways, your trachea and lungs, those dry out too, and probably it's not as efficient in protecting you.
So it's really not that it gets cold.
No.
It's more the behavior that the cold brings on.
Yep.
Now, when we think of vaccines, I've been amazed at how many people are anti-vaxxers, yet have children in school.
Mm-hmm.
As far as I knew, you had to be vaccinated for mumps, measles, rubella before you go to school.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any real difference between getting a vaccine for COVID and getting your normal I hate to call it normal, but your standard vaccine?
Well, again, initially there was, I think, reasonable hesitancy in people about this. This is a slightly different type of vaccine, this mRNA, messenger RNA technology. This was the first type of vaccine to use that. But they tested it initially in tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions. And now it's billions of people have gotten these vaccines. And we know that the side effects are pretty rare. There are some side effects, but they're rare, and probably, it's probably safer than most other vaccines, just because we know, a huge portion of the world's population.
Would
has
I be
got it.
wrong in calling this the biggest clinical trial known to man?
Initially, I think it was, yeah. But, there's a clinical trial, then there's real world, what we see. So the initial clinical trials were very big. And, I think, I think it was it was a remarkable achievement to test this vaccine.
I mean, I could see some pause taken by people saying, you developed this vaccine in how short of a period?
Yeah.
Because when I think of vaccine development, 2 years, 3 years?
Yeah.
And this came out in months?
Yeah, yeah. Well, they had sort of similar vaccines to this that weren't as widely used, but people were working on, like an Ebola vaccine, for example, that they tested on a fair number of people. That was very similar, and it's similar in its structure, though it was against Ebola, not a virus, not COVID. So, and certainly there's tons of animal data and such, so it wasn't totally out of nowhere.
It just amazed me, because when the president said we would have a vaccine in 6 months, I remember saying, I don't know what he's taking, but he ought to share it, because I've never seen a vaccine developed in 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, the American medical group did it.
Yeah. And it was international, too. It wasn't just us, so though.
Yeah, but we were the drivers.
Yeah, to a large part.
Now, Pfizer had a 1 injection vaccine, Moderna had a 2. I can see the 2 stage. When I think of immunological response being better, safer.
Mm-hmm. I think you're thinking of the Johnson & Johnson.
Oh, the Johnson.
Yeah. Yeah, because Pfizer and Moderna were very similar to, they're basically almost interchangeable. The Johnson & Johnson was the different vaccine that was in a viral vector. And initially they said it was one vaccine, but it didn't work as well, and it actually had a bit more complications. Very rare, but there were complications with that.
So, in your mind, if you had a choice?
Well, right now there are some. There's actually a new. There are different classes of vaccine. There's the messenger RNA vaccines. That's the one that 90+% of people had. There's the old Johnson & Johnson J&J vaccine that we're not really recommending that much anymore because it's less effective and safe, but not nearly. There's more. It's less safe. Let's put it that way than the other.
But I mean, the efficacy was what, 70% versus 90%?
Something like that. But the new kid in the block is something called Novavax that they're bringing out now. This is more of an old-fashioned vaccine. It's very similar to the Shingrix, the shingles vaccine. So this is sort of older technology, but it seems to be pretty effective. It took a long time to get this up and running. It took years because it's a harder vaccine to produce. But there are people who, for whatever reason, just don't want to get a messenger RNA vaccine, or people who got a vaccine and had what they thought were bad side effects that could be, what we call reactogenicity. When you're getting a messenger RNA vaccine, sometimes you feel cruddy, which is your immune system kicking in, but it can be kind of intense sometimes with the messenger RNA vaccines. So there is a new vaccine out there. It's not being used that much, but if for whatever reason you never wanted to, you were skeptical of this new technology, which again has been used in 1 billion+ people, or you had a reaction to the vaccine. There are other options.
But now realistically, I'm going for my next booster.
Mhm.
Do I really have a preference as to which one I pick?
Between the ones that are most readily available, there's Pfizer and Moderna. They're pretty close in efficacy, and they're very similar.
I mean, I could see providers wanting the Moderna because you don't have to deal with minus 70 storage.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a dry ice incubator, for the love of God. Not every place has them, and they're expensive to maintain.
Yeah.
But as a patient, I mean, I showed up to the med center and got harpooned. I didn't care how it was stored.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
That was Uncle Ed's problem.
Yeah.
He had to pay for the storage.
Yeah.
So now it's time, and I'm ready to go for my next booster.
Good.
Do you see this becoming like the flu shot that once a year?
We're not sure. That's a short answer. Because again, it's been a year plus. It's been a couple of years, I guess, with the vaccines, but we're still measuring the different functions of how good they are this far out. And so, if you got the 2 vaccines, then a booster, and then another booster, is that going to last for a few years? It might. It might. We're not sure. So until that comes out.
Why would I take a chance? I mean, at the end of the day,
Yeah.
a year's gone by, and I'm making a decision. Do I risk getting sick, or do I just get pinched by that small needle?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one thing I should emphasize, they're the risks are very low. So you say a risk-benefit calculation. The benefits are potentially very important, particularly for the initial vaccine. But with the boosters, where it is, what we have to mention is the people who really benefit the most from the boosters will be the elderly, the people who have weakened immune systems, people with cancer, as we mentioned. Those people are sort of in a separate category, and they need all the help they can get with their immune system. People who are younger, again, I would recommend the booster. It would, it very likely will help you fight off these new variants a little bit better than the older vaccines. So, yeah, the risks are pretty darn low.
But now the new boosters,
Yeah.
they're not the same. It's not like you're getting the same vaccine that you got before.
Well, just, you brought up the flu, and it's similar that in this case, that everybody should be getting their flu vaccine, by the way. We get a new flu shot every year because there are different variants around, and also for boosting. So those are 2 reasons why we get a new flu shot.
Now, it's interesting because you use the word shot and vaccine interchangeably.
Yeah.
And I always got a kick out of it because we never say it's the COVID shot. It's the COVID vaccine.
No.
But the flu shot is a flu vaccine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, my understanding, there's 3 variants that make up the flu shot,
Yeah,
or 3 strains.
some of them have 4 strains now. Yeah.
How do they pick? I mean, again, I may not be accurate, but I thought you kept 2 of the same from last year,
Mm-hmm.
and some wizard picked saying, let's get rid of number 3 and add in this new one.
Well, sometimes, their flu is complicated, and, there are different sort of classes of the flu. We heard about H1n1. That was a big one that caused a big outbreak which was pretty big. This is the biggest outbreak before COVID was the 2009 H1n1 outbreak, which was pretty intense. But
That was the first show
yeah,
that you came on
yeah,
that started 90 straight medical shows.
Mm.
I remember, God, that was forever ago.
yeah. So like a lot of, very often they'll include an H1N1 because that's still around, but it mutates a bit. So the H1N1 component from this year or previous years might be slightly different. They change it around a little bit. And they decide what's going on in different parts of the world, and which because flu can often comes from Asia and spreads to our country. We know also that, as we were talking before the show, the southern hemisphere gets it before we do. So we know in Australia it was a bad flu season, so it'll probably be during their winter, which was our summer. So during our winter, we have a good idea of what viruses are going to be out there, and the flu vaccine should cover them. And again, what we know about, COVID has taught us a lot about how to think about vaccines. So even the flu that we've been dealing with for 100 plus years with vaccines, we know more about what we should be measuring. So one of the things is, with the flu vaccine, people sometimes get discouraged and they say, well, I heard the flu vaccine was only 40% effective. Well, what does that mean? It's 40% effective in some years where it wasn't that effective. It was 40% effective at preventing you from ever getting the flu. But again, like with COVID, we know that the people who end up in the hospital are those with the flu or those who haven't been vaccinated. So COVID has sort of taught us to think about what's important for a vaccine. It's maybe not preventing you from getting ill at all or getting the virus at all, but from getting seriously ill.
But again, I got COVID.
Yep.
It annoyed me.
Yep.
Because I had to sit home for days and isolate. But it was an annoyance.
Yeah. If you didn't get a vaccine, you could have been a lot sicker.
A good friend of mine was in the hospital for months.
Yeah.
And he was lucky he came out.
Yeah.
So, I kind of sit there and say, I'd rather be annoyed than have my life threatened.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen, when I look at new drugs coming out and I go see the results of their clinical trials to see what side effects, and I've never seen a 1 billion person clinical trial.
Yeah. Again, I'd be careful of the nomenclature, as well as I, that those, the trials were done first and then it was distributed out to 1 billion people. But that wasn't a trial. It's post-trial.
No, that was commercialization.
Yeah, yeah.
But still, before I got my shot,
Yeah.
I mean, candidly, I don't care if you call it a trial, a smile, or anything else. There was 1 billion people ahead of me.
Yeah.
And I didn't hear any horrible, terrible plagues upon us.
Exactly. And that's what I say about the flu, what I used to say about the flu shot, and still do, well before COVID, is, in this country, a good chunk of the country follows the advice that, basically everybody, from 6 months on should get a flu shot every year. And, the side effects are very rare and often, not serious.
I mean, the worst that I've ever had is some site sensitivity.
Yep.
Some injection site sensitivity. But you stick a harpoon in my arm, it's going to hurt a little.
Yep.
But then it goes away. And
that sensitivity could be your white cells rushing in and getting educated from the antigen that's in your arm.
I think it's my mind looking at somebody sticking a sharp needle in my arm.
Could be.
It's more psychological than... So we take 3... Do we keep the same 3 flu strains and add a 4th now? Is that what happens?
Yeah, and it changes every year, and I don't even know the subunits off the top of my head. I know the one that's circulating in the right now is called H1n1, and there is a pretty good match, I believe, in the vaccine. But we have to see what happens as the season goes on. But I think the big lesson from COVID is we should think about, is the flu vaccine keeping us from getting very sick if we get the flu? And the evidence is, even if you get the flu when you get a vaccine, just like COVID, you'll have less of an illness.
And I think that's key to understand, not just for people who are immunocompromised, but for normal, healthy people. If you can get it and be annoyed, it's a lot better than getting it and feeling sick. And when you say, well, it's only 40%, it wasn't that good, that's better than none.
Exactly. And what we know are big companies for a long time, have been giving it away free for their employees, and they may be doing it for the goodness of their hearts, but more likely they're doing it because they don't want their employees
It cost
out.
me $25 to pay for an employee to have a flu shot.
Yeah.
And if I put on the clinic in my company, there's a higher likelihood of compliance versus losing somebody for, what's flu, 5-6 days?
Yeah.
Okay, now which 5-6 days is a lot more than the $25 it's going to cost me to give a free flu shot.
Yeah. So, it's definitely been shown. They've done many studies that absenteeism is much lower when you get the flu shot.
Now I have a marketing question. Does the rodent union have a better PR firm than the monkey union, and that's why we're calling monkeypox?
Yeah, so we're changing to the newer virus that's been in the news, and we were talking a little bit about why it's called monkeypox and what is monkeypox, so we can talk about it. Monkeypox is very different from the flu and from COVID, which are both respiratory viruses, and they're both they're different, but they're closer to each other than monkeypox, which is a whole different virus. It's a DNA virus. It's sort of a distant cousin of smallpox, which was a very scary virus. And, it's called monkeypox for kind of strange reasons. We don't get it from monkeys, so it probably shouldn't be called monkeypox. What happened is it was originally found in a lab that was doing research on rodents and doing research on monkeys, and they had the monkeys next to the rodents in a cage, and all of a sudden the monkeys had these weird pox lesions all over them, and a virologist isolated the virus and said, oh, this is a new virus. It's a distant cousin of smallpox, but it's not causing smallpox, it's causing these lesions that are different.
So the rodents gave it to the monkeys.
Yeah, and the rodents give it to humans in Africa. This has been going on. I hear from colleagues, some of my colleagues do work in other parts of the world. I've been sort of limited to Milford, Massachusetts for the last 20 years, but some of my more venturesome colleagues are all over the world. And if you practice infectious disease in Western Africa, you'll see monkeypox people coming in who hunt rodents sometimes for food or whatever. Will get these lesions, and it's not a pleasant illness to get, but it's usually resolves, and people don't get that sick usually. So what happened with this epidemic this year is it spread to different populations. It was we have to be very careful and not to stigmatize different groups, but the initial group that it spread initially was men who have sex with men, the gay population. But it spread in that population, but now it's, it's not, it can be spread through sex, but it could also be spread through close contact.
I was going to say, we assume that that's fluid transfer that did it.
Yeah. Well, not really fluid. It's touching those skin lesions.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It's not really fluid. It's,
Yeah.
You could just rub up next to somebody.
Yeah.
I guess it's skin to skin. Is that legit?
Skin to skin, occasionally what we call fomites. So, theoretically, if you share a towel with somebody, it could.
If you share a towel?
Yeah.
So this is skin that could get deposited on a towel that is then picked up by somebody else?
Virus from the skin to the towel, yeah. So, most commonly it's spread through close contact, hugging someone, having sex with someone. But it can also be spread by, bedding or towels and things like that.
Yeah, but if you're playing sports, you rub up against your competitor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If it's skin to skin, that's something. I mean, again, usually it's spread through visible lesions. So
okay.
We should, it's not.
So as a hockey player, I'm safer than a basketball player.
Yeah. Or, I was not a very successful junior high school wrestler, but I think about wrestling a lot because, you're getting.
There you're really asking for trouble.
Yeah. There's a lot of skin to skin contact, and then the wrestling mat where people are getting ground into.
So now, if you get this monkeypox, what happens? I mean, what are the symptoms? What are the outcome?
Yeah, most often it's a few, pox-like lesions, which are little bubbles, often looking a little pussy, but it can also look a little bit like, shingles. It can have that sort of appearance. They're called vesicles. Those lesions are usually kind of painful, and it depends what location it is. If it's sexually transmitted and it's on your genitals, it can be very, very painful. They will resolve in a week or two and crust over, and the vast majority of the time that's it. But again, they can be painful. They can.
Yeah, I can't imagine it's very pleasant to have those crusting over activities in certain parts of your body.
Yeah. And I should say monkeypox is, I should back up, and we say that it's spread chiefly through skin-to-skin contact. There are other ways where it rarely can be transmitted. Occasionally it can get into your airways, and particularly your saliva. So that's rare, but when we're taking care of patients, and we've diagnosed a couple of people locally with monkeypox who have monkeypox or suspected monkeypox, we do wear masks, and because rarely it can be spread through respiratory contact, particularly if you're up close to somebody for a prolonged period.
That's interesting because people can get stigmatized without proper cause.
Yeah. And, we'll see. The CDC has guidelines of how we take care of people with suspected monkeypox, and we do use the protective
The PPE?
PPE, yes. But it's, what I heard, and I don't know if this is still true, about a month ago, they had told me that in the United States, we're up to tens of thousands, maybe up to 100,000 cases, I'm not sure, of monkeypox. as of like a month ago, there weren't any healthcare workers who've gotten it taking care of patients. There are family members who get it, because again, you don't need to have sexual contact. It can be close
No,
contact.
you said it's just skin to skin, close contact.
Yep. And even what we call fomites, towels and bedding and such.
God, I never thought of that.
Yeah.
Now, is it predominantly, you said it started in Africa?
Mm-hmm.
Because of a research lab, or?
No, this is natural, just like COVID, came from an animal. This came from rodents. It's been a problem in Africa for decades, if not, longer. It spread to the population of men who have sex with men. But now it's no longer a really sexually transmitted disease. It's certainly not a gay disease. The populations that are getting it now, are less the men who have sex with men. It's heterosexual contact.
I was going to say, wait a minute, skin to skin contact.
Yeah.
That could be you and your wife.
Yeah, exactly.
It could be, kids, as they're hitting those 20 years old, or you have a daughter, and when you say they want that, when they're 30. Skin to skin contact should be limited till they're about 30. But realistically, it's not just a man on man thing. It could be man on woman, woman on man, anything.
There have been even cases, particularly during the summer, where people are in discotheques and, dancing and bouncing off each other, maybe not wearing as much clothes in the summer or for other reasons. And, someone might have a couple of skin lesions. They're not quite sure. It doesn't always look like a scary
big pussy.
It could be, it's a weird rash. Well, that rash may be a little irritation one day, then it eventually will get pussy and concerning. But when it's even starting, it could be contagious.
Is there a treatment, or just wait it out, let your immune system win?
Yeah. Vast majority of cases, we don't need treatment. There are some drugs that we're using, particularly in people whose immune systems are not working well, or for people who have these really horribly painful lesions in their genitals or other areas that are just, we want to get rid of that infection more quickly. There are some medications, one medication in particular, it's called TPOXX, that they're doing trials, but we know it appears to be effective. There's also a vaccine, which was originally developed for smallpox, and again, smallpox and monkeypox are very similar, and it appears to be pretty effective against monkeypox. So now it's mainly for high-risk groups, which can be the male gay population, but it could also be people who, if you have more than one sexual partner.
I was going to say, it could be the same thing as when we had, that fictitious name of GRID.
Yeah.
That it was just for men on men.
Yeah.
And then they realized, no, people with a high sex rate or multiple partners.
Exactly. So one indication for the vaccine is if you had more than one sexual partner over the last 14 days, regardless of the sex of your sexual partner.
I was going to say, I think I'm safe. One partner in the last 40-some years. I think I'm safe on that side.
Yeah.
Now, here's the cold question. Is it a problem in Milford?
Colds?
No, I said it's a cold question because it's a heartless question.
Yeah.
But do we have monkeypox problem in Milford?
Well, as I said, we've diagnosed a couple of people in the area, which is not unsurprising if there are tens of thousands cases in the country. It's something we have to keep an eye on. Thankfully, there were some initial projections concerning that it might spread widely. it doesn't seem to be. We had our eyes particularly on what you mentioned, kids and even non-sexual transmission in sports. That's something we're looking at, but I don't know if there have been cases of that.
But if it's been two,
Yeah.
and hopefully they noticed and they isolated,
Yeah.
it should be self-effacing. I mean, it
Yeah,
should just
exactly.
go away.
It should be. What physicians should know and what patients should know is, it's rare. It's usually, if you're not, in contact with somebody that is at high risk for monkeypox, you probably have less of a chance. But what we're telling physicians that if you have certain rashes, regardless of what your risks are, if you have something that looks like shingles, for example, but it's not responding to treatment, or something that looks like, either oral cold sores or genital sores that are not responding to typical treatment, to think about monkeypox.
To check.
Yeah.
Now, is there COVID. Now I go and I scrub my nose and annoy
Yeah.
myself, and within 15 minutes I got either a red line or no red line.
Mm-hmm.
What happens if I want to know if I have monkeypox?
Well, they have to swab the area again, which can be painful.
Can be annoying.
Can be painful because these are painful lesions, and then we send it off, and they do the similar testing at PCR.
So there's no rapid test. It's PCR based.
Right now it is. I think they may be working on rapid tests, but right now it's PCR.
But like everything else, if you have a doubt, go to your primary care physician and deal with it.
Exactly. Yeah, because you get it diagnosed, and prevent it from spreading to other people. Figure out what it is, because people might have this rash that's painful, and you're not sure what it is. It's good to have it checked out.
Now, the majority of effort goes into COVID, the flu, a little bit of monkeypox. There are other infectious diseases in the community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we missed I think we did a talk years ago about tick-borne illnesses. So
Lyme disease.
yeah, Lyme disease, and the other is anaplasma babesia. They're still around. We're getting out of tick season now, but we still see that in our area. Other things that I see, they're typical infections that we can get anytime. Urinary tract infections, pneumonias. We see that every day. Occasionally, wound infections of different sorts. Yeah.
But I mean, I guess one of the limitations that we face, one of the issues, is when you have people coming in from all over the world. There's certain places, I mean, we take for granted. When was the last time we thought of somebody in Milford having TB?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, one of the reasons, there are many reasons why I enjoy working at Milford Regional Medical Center and this community is, one of them is it's even though this is kind of a outer suburb, somewhat rural, we have a mixture of different people, and so we're seeing people whose great-grandparents lived here, and we're seeing people who've come here, families who came here, 100 years ago, 50 years ago, or last week. We're seeing people who travel all over the world for business. A lot, we have a high-tech industry on the 495 belt, Waters Corporation, EMC. These people are traveling for work or for pleasure. So, nothing is local anymore. So we see tropical diseases. We see malaria occasionally from travelers. Every year we see a case or two whether it's brought back from people going back to India or Africa or certain parts of South America or Asia. We see that. Tuberculosis is another disease that we typically associate with other parts of the world, although, 100 years ago it was here big time. There's some people who come from other parts of the world who are infected with illnesses like that.
Well, we had people asking us a question. Why is Milford spending money treating people from other parts of the world for things like TB?
Yeah.
And I think people forget that the great incubator, the school system, affects everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So you do it because, who could turn their back on any sick child? Just not going to happen. But if you're cold, you remember that it's our daughters, our sons, our grandkids sitting in the same schoolroom as kids who come from a different part of the world.
Yeah.
And it just may be that they don't vaccinate in that part of the world for TB.
Or the vaccines for TB, we don't have great ones anyway. There are ones that are used in other parts of the world that don't work that well, but maybe better than nothing. But yeah, as you mentioned, people from South America, from Asia, maybe environments where TB is more common.
And we had a period years ago where Hep A all of a sudden sprung up.
Yeah.
And it was business people.
Yeah.
And they went and did bad things in East Africa. They ate salad.
Yeah.
So you sit there and say it's not like they're participating in risky behavior.
Yeah.
They ate a salad. And all of a sudden, Hep A was with them.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you for keeping our families safe and educating us on the big three right now. And just like decades ago when you came on and talked about H1n1,
Yeah.
I'm sure that in years coming we'll be calling you to say, please educate us on something new.
Yeah. Always something new to keep us on our toes.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
And as always, to our 6 loyal viewers, may God bless. May tomorrow be a better day than today. And I am so proud to be associated with, as a town resident, the Milford Medical Center. When I grew up, it was the Little Red Hospital. And we would never be having discussions about cancer centers, infectious disease centers that really brought home state-of-the-art treatment, and more importantly, people like Dr. Newstein, who bring home a level of care that we can be proud of. So again, thank you, and good night all.
Not too long since I've been home, been running all my life